Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui, back with you with what I hope is another informative and inspiring episode. At the moment, we have 3 planets in Aquarius. We've got Pluto, of course, Mars, and Venus. And additionally, it's Pisces season, so the Sun, Saturn, Mercury, and Neptune are in Pisces. And it's had me thinking a lot about how we work as a collective. And specifically, I was thinking about this phrase that I often hear thrown around. You don't owe anyone anything. And I think that in a culture that often demands more of us than we have to give, I can see why people like that phrase. And there have been times where that has been true for me, like a workplace demanding more time than they were owed, or someone that I had a connection to was demanding more of me than I was able to give. So in those moments, I can understand this idea that we don't owe anyone anything, right? We all have our own limitations, our own boundaries, or hopefully anyway. And especially if we're socialized as women or girls, we can be trained to give more of ourselves, to push ourselves further than we're actually really comfortable doing. And I think that that is a good thing to acknowledge. But at the same time, the phrase, "you don't owe anyone anything," makes me deeply uncomfortable. Both Aquarius energy and Pisces energy represent collectives. With Aquarius, the collective is humanity. We are all this species that exists here on this tiny little planet. And as far as we know, we're the only human beings out there. Therefore, we are intrinsically connected, even if we wish to deny that fact. Pisces energy, as we talk about later in this episode, very much has to do with everything, all things that exist on this plane and every other plane, the spiritual and the physical, all of it. And what Pisces energy teaches us ultimately is that all things are connected. And right now we are seeing so many reminders of that in our culture, in our politics, in the decisions that we're making, in the communities that we're organizing. Not one single person can claim that they don't benefit from the collective of humanity, because I can assure you that most of us don't grow our own produce. We don't produce all of the fibers that make up the clothing that we wear. We don't pave the roads that we drive on. And human beings, of course, are social creatures. So most of us also need social interaction. We need community support. We need the support of the people that we are close to and have a level of intimacy with. Not even the most lonely and isolated person, I think, can truly say that they exist completely on their own. We are really interdependent. And if you're an American, we live in a culture where that interdependence is denied and rejected at every turn. We are expected to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. An impossible task. A fantasy, really. And why is it that we are taught to fantasize about this illusion of total individuality that many of us are raised with? What I can tell you is that the idea that we don't owe each other anything is enormously useful to our oppressors. When we walk down the street and we see an unhoused person digging through garbage, and we think, that's not my problem, that has nothing to do with me, and go about our day and our lives and do nothing to investigate the situation that might have led that person to be in that situation, to investigate our government situation that led to somebody falling through the cracks in this way in the first place in the richest country in the world. When we say, you don't owe anyone anything, it often feels like permission to turn off your curiosity. The same way that people say, oh, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, and proceed to continue shopping at Amazon or whatever it is. And I'm not criticizing people that rely on places like Amazon for support. But I do feel like people use these phrases like get out of jail free cards, like there's nothing that we could possibly do better. that we are just one person. And if we don't owe anyone anything, then are any of us really ever obligated to change the way that we do things? To step up to the plate? Because a lot of these issues affect all of us, whether we like it or not. Many of us are only a few bad circumstances away from being that unhoused person. And I think it says a lot about our culture that there is open hostility and even violence towards the poorest among us in that situation. That is a collective issue. Because you can't tell me that the people that rail against the poor people that live on the streets are going into their regular everyday lives and bestowing support and compassion around everyone else. Because that kind of energy is difficult to contain. When you kill that sense of compassion within yourself, when you push it down and explain it away. Oh, they made mistakes, they don't manage money well, maybe they're an addict, maybe they have mental health issues, nobody cares about them, they're a criminal, they deserve to be there. The compassion deficit that I've noticed really worries me for humanity. And I've said before, I don't think we need to waste time trying to convince these people to be more compassionate. I think that's a waste of our energy, to be honest, at this point. We're in a situation where we have a lot of work to do collectively, and those of us who still have connection to that sense of compassion within us are probably feeling that very intimately right now. Because Pisces energy can be deeply compassionate. It can understand this sense of connection between all things and the interconnectivity between each and every human being and everything else in existence. And with the Aquarius energy that we have right now, particularly Mars in Aquarius squaring Uranus, we really are being asked to change how we do things, to change our perspective and the way that we take action, not separating ourselves from everyone else. Not saying, oh, it's somebody else's job. You don't owe anyone anything. I think we do owe each other quite a lot. I think those of us that are still in touch with that care and compassion, we owe it to ourselves and to each other to show up and make things better. To connect with other people that are, like Lori Rivers says, like-hearted, that understand the work that is to be done, and understand that each and every one of us benefits from the world being a more compassionate place for all people and living things and our environment. You don't owe anyone anything. I think that's bullshit. I think that's a cop-out. So next time you or someone else uses that phrase, ask yourself, what are they really saying with this? Is this a situation of personal boundaries, or is this an easy way to let go of any responsibility that we have to one another? Because I can tell you with the way that the world is going right now, that if we all turn around and say that we don't owe each other anything, we're not going to be in good shape. We are being reminded at every turn that we are connected. And maybe if we looked at responsibility to each other as a gift to the collective, maybe it wouldn't feel so offensive. So maybe it's time to ask ourselves what we do owe each other, what we do owe ourselves as one piece of that collective. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by astrologers Kaycee Felton-Lui and Kaycee Felton-Lui for a conversation about Virgo and Pisces energy. They're sister signs, so there's a lot to talk about and compare and contrast there. Afterwards, I give you the scoop on this Sunday's new moon in Pisces and how you can take advantage of that energy. I am very excited for our conversation today. We're going to be talking about Virgo energy and Pisces energy in celebration of this Pisces season. It's got me thinking about the connection between the two of these sister signs. And I'm fortunate enough to be joined by astrologers Kaycee Felton-Lui and Kaycee Felton-Lui, who've both been guests on Petty Astrology before. So happy to have you guys back. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
It's great to be with you guys.
I love a roundtable discussion of astrology. And as I always say, petty astrology is like if the astrology podcasts serve cunt, you know?
Totally.
We there's astrology here, but there's a little something else too. And so it's always nice to be with the people that I love talking astrology with most. We do it differently here. So we're going to start by talking about Virgo energy. And the reason we're talking about it is because, of course, these signs are opposites. And I think when you're new to astrology, opposing signs do seem like, oppositional, right? And they are opposite of one another in an astrology chart, in any astrology chart, no matter which one you're looking at. And it's actually more of a sisterly relationship. They're also called sister signs. So actually looking at them together tells us a lot about each of them individually. And so that's kind of the basis of our conversation here today. People like to give Virgos, a hard time, I think. And there's a lot more to Virgos than, being crotchety, complaining all the time, or, whatever the stereotypes are. So, first of all, the basics. Virgo energy, it's an earth sign. It's also a mutable sign. So there's some versatility to it. And any opposite sign, any sister sign, they're always going to share that quality. So both Pisces and Virgo have that in common. They're both mutable signs. And the planet that rules Virgo is Mercury. Mercury in astrology has very much to do with our mental capacity, the way that our brain processes information, the way that we communicate. And so it's a very mental sign. And another basic fact about Virgo energy, of course, the name is associated with virginity, which is kind of funny. I think in this day and age, I think virginity as a concept has changed a lot over time. But the virgin is the symbol that is traditionally associated with Virgo, which we can talk about. And then Virgo, in terms of, the body, Virgo rules the intestines and the colon. So, maybe that explains something if you're familiar with what it's like to have Virgo energy. There can be some digestive issues, tummy troubles. That's kind of a common thing that we hear brought up with Virgo energy. So those are like the basics. Virgo is also the sign of the harvest, right? And I think maybe we'll step back and we'll talk about the relationship between the seasons and the signs. And most of this is based on the northern hemisphere. So, the time of year Virgo season that's when the sun is in Virgo, is typically the time in the northern hemisphere that there's harvests happening. So that's part of the symbolism of Virgo, which is good to know. Part of that is that, like, collecting the harvest, for those of us who are not farmers, I guess. The thing about collecting the harvest is that, you got to wait till it's ready, right? You're not going to go out there and bring all your crops in if they're still growing, right? But then when you go out to do that harvest, you want to make sure you get everything in time before it kind of dies on the vine, right? So there's this like precise quality to Virgo energy that I feel like is sort of the first thing that comes to mind to me when I think of Virgo energy. What about you guys? What is like the first headline when you think of Virgo energy?
I definitely think of like that precision and like fine tuning and just like improving basically. Like that's kind of what I think of automatically when I think of Virgo. It's kind of like, their stereotype is like the perfectionist, but I mean, this goes back to them being like the virgin. I think that they're the virgin because they're like continually purifying and like refining and making things better. And that could be part of that precision. And even like the harvesting, I think of like they're gathering information almost. And, they're ruled by Mercury. So it's a very mercurial sign. And so like they're gathering like for analysis so they can make the best decision possible that they can. That's kind of what I think of anyway.
Yeah. What about you, Kathy?
With Virgo energy, I so often see the stereotype of Virgo being critical,
Mm.
and I feel like that's unnecessary Virgo slander, especially spread across the internet.
Mm.
And I prefer to look at Virgo from the view of Virgo being the caretaker. And that's been my personal lived experience with Virgo energy. They reap the harvest, but they watch over as well, and they protect that land, and they bring it to life.
Yeah. Well, so if you're harvesting anything, it's in preparation for the winter time, right? Like when you're not going to be able to grow stuff. So you have to allot things and store them in a particular way so it doesn't go bad, right? Maybe you're doing some canning, preserving, drying, whatever it is, to have enough to carry you over the winter, right? Which is notoriously difficult conditions. You're not growing anything in winter.
Right.
So,
Right. Virgo is very forward thinking, I believe.
yeah. It has to be. That's like where the precision comes from, right? It's like because
Exactly.
if somebody's not doing those calculations and maybe, the math and the details that others that maybe don't have those skills, that affects all of us. We definitely need people that have these abilities to, calculate and maybe sort through the data and the details that maybe those of us that don't have, prominent personal Virgo placements are not
Yes.
necessarily, gunning to do. But it is life or death. That is the kind of care that is being given. It's very practical care. Like if we don't have enough food to get through the winter, then what's the point of any of this? You know what I mean? Like we're going to have some pretty big problems.
Mhm.
In a certain sense, like that, there's a lot of weight to that, right? Like there's a lot of pressure to that. And even, maybe if that is, a skill of Virgo energy, it could be easy to get overwhelmed with that kind of pressure, even if you're good at it, even if, that's a certain amount of weight on your shoulders. And it is a very loving energy, I think, to tend to things, to maybe those are the less glamorous things in life. I think that's a really big theme with Virgo energy is it really isn't about how things look. It's not about appearances, and it's not because there isn't concern or understanding that appearances mean something in, our world, but that there are more important qualities, I think, to focus on. So it's not very ostentatious. It's not very opulent because that's not necessarily the focus of that energy. And so oftentimes I find that there's a quality to Virgo energy. It's just really like unpretentious, in a certain way. It's not necessarily looking for recognition. It's more about like a job well done.
Mhm.
It can be very like behind the scenes in that way. I liked what you said about the critical quality because I think that is one of the big stereotypes about Virgo energy. And I think Virgo energy can be critical. Like it is definitely within the capacity of Virgo energy to be critical. My thoughts about that is like if you see all of the details of things, if you are measuring things, in a very precise way, and you can see, oh, that's a little bit off. That's a little bit off because that's, kind of your energetic job in some way is to notice the details. Like, it's pretty easy to find criticism. So I think it's like a matter of how, like with any energy, it's like how it's being expressed. Like, how is the person that has that energy choosing to express it? So I think it's like definitely possible for Virgo energy to be critical, but at the same time at maybe a higher expression, or if you're playing more of a high note, with that Virgo energy, it can be very detail oriented. And that's the details are important, right? Because like, let's say we're going to go back to the harvest metaphor because I think that's working for me today. But like, imagine if you're storing an enormous amount of grain and like each measurement of the grain is just a little bit off and you're doing it over and over and over. If you're doing something over and over and over and it's a little bit off, by the end of the day, it's going to be a lot of bit off. You know what I mean? Because all of those details, when you stack them together, they're going to mean something more significant. So there's an importance to the specifics, I think, that Virgo kind of deals in. And so for those of us maybe that don't have that energy in our personal placements, it might seem more critical to us. Sometimes maybe we don't see the importance to some of the details that Virgo might see.
I definitely always value like a Virgo's input.
Mm,
I mean, I've always had Virgos in my life, thankfully. So I'm always like, they just give you like that no bullshit advice
mm.
and like they'll tell you how it is. And I always really appreciate that about them. even if it can be a little harsh sometimes, but I definitely value it.
Yeah. And this quote I found from Alan Oken, he said, excessive use of his critical faculties can make him seem somewhat hard and unfeeling. He does not reveal himself easily, and he is in no rush to form superficial relationships.
Mhm.
And that take on Virgo energy makes a lot of sense to me because it's like, if you don't really care about somebody that much, why would you even bother telling them the detail that you're concerned with? And I think that sometimes, like, I think we can lose sight, especially in a day and age when, you open your phone and there's somebody like having a take on something. Like, criticism is something that generates a lot of views. You know what I mean? Like, people are interested in criticism. That's the other thing that's funny about it, is that people don't usually love people that they consider critical, but then we eat up a lot of criticism. So it's like, what is the truth? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Do you like it or do you not? I guess when it's directed at you is the problem.
Yes.
But there is a loving quality to criticism in some senses. And that's not to say that people can't be, horrible complainers or tear people down. That's, certainly a quality that, any sign can have a hand at in its own way. But the superficial quality, it's like, if somebody really cares about you, shouldn't they feel free to be like, hey, maybe this detail of this situation is a little bit off and maybe you should do something about it?
Mhm.
That is compassionate, I think.
Mhm.
Absolutely. It's the ultimate accountability.
Mhm.
Virgo Virgo says no. You're going to look yourself in the mirror. And you're right. People, you know, they wouldn't be critical if they didn't care so much.
Mhm.
Because if they didn't care, they wouldn't give a shit. You would not be worth the time. Like, they would not waste the energy.
100%.
Understand, Virgo. They're not going to waste the energy on something they don't care about.
Exactly. Because they have better things to be doing, to be
Yeah.
honest. Like, a Virgo has, an agenda, perhaps a checklist of things that they would like to do. Maybe the checklist is ongoing, maybe it's kind of chaotic, maybe it never ends, but there is an agenda, I think, with Virgo
Yeah.
energy often. So it's like, I actually really need to go and take care of these things that are actually important and not worry about you and all your little problems. So I'm not even going to say anything. It's a different, I think, compassion than we are often cultured in here. Because, like, in contrast, example, we're going to talk about Pisces energy more later on. But I think culturally, we are, especially if we're socialized as women or girls, it's like immersing yourself in helping somebody in kind of a more Pisces way, where you kind of lose
Hmm.
yourself to being
Yeah.
of service, is more favored, I think, in the way that a lot of us are socialized. Whereas Virgo, I think, has a better sense of boundaries. It's an earth sign. There are by nature, limitations and physical qualities that we're dealing in here. So I think that Virgo energy tends to have more of a sense of boundaries if we're talking about it in a general way. And boundaries, I think, oftentimes in our culture, if you're confronted with somebody else's boundaries, I have seen people respond to that as if they are being attacked because somebody else said no to them. You know what I mean? Like, I think that might have something to do with why there is a certain level of criticism of Virgo energy. You know what I mean?
Mhm. It's funny, every Virgo I know, they have really great boundaries.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's the thing. I think Virgo energy is, if I give all of my energy to you and I still have this big harvest back at home to deal with, how the hell am I going to be able to do it all? You know what I mean? There has to be some sense of your own physical limitations. Like, I can't do it all,
Mhm.
And I think that even for a Virgo energy person can be overwhelming, because I do think that sometimes Virgo energy does want to do it all, or maybe does want to help more than they physically have capacity to.
Yes.
But it's important to know that, like, if you don't take care of yourself and your own needs and things that are right in front of you that directly affect your ability to help anybody else, that's a pretty important thing to factor into the way that you do things. And that takes humility to know your limitations, right?
Yes, it does.
Because that's another thing, is that if a Virgo is critical of everyone else and they can't be reflective on their own flaws and places where they can improve, then that would be, I think, an imbalance of that energy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think Virgos can also be very self-critical too. Again, if you see all of the details, you see when everything's a little off, it's like, well, very easy to be self-critical. And there is a quality of Virgo that is to do with self-improvement. Self-improvement also makes you better able to be of service to other people.
Mhm.
So the two can go hand in hand. And I think that those understanding those boundaries and the importance of the boundary between the self and the person that you're helping is really significant. And just like having that humility to know that you can't do it all, that's important.
Mhm.
And it's not self-deprecating to be like, yeah, I actually cannot do it all. I can't do it all.
Mhm. They conserve their energy for the things that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And so I think that there is this quality of Virgo that can look at what is actually necessary versus what just looks good.
Mhm.
And it's important because it's like if plenty of things look good and then you get up close and you're like, actually, this is super flawed and unstable and is going to cause problems later down the road. And I think that Virgo energy really sees that. It's like, well, if you leave this other stuff undone, is it actually good? Because it's not going to be
Right.
sustainable.
It's like they're always a step ahead.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's good to have around.
Mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the thing is that with Virgo energy, they can see a lot of different routes. They can see different outcomes to things. They can map things forward, especially if let's say we're talking about like a Virgo Mercury, they're going to be somebody that is going to be dealing really in the details, going to be able to see here are the different options. And here are the different routes that we can take. And maybe these are the different potential outcomes from those routes. And they might even be doing it on such a quick, level that it's not like they're sitting there and necessarily like articulating all this. It can be very just second nature. Like, well, this is the way we go because, I've done all these calculations and lived a lot of life. And,
Mhm.
decision making can be quick in that sense because there's this constant sense of self-improvement and refinement that's happening, even if it's not necessarily, I'm self-improving, I am refining. That's just something that goes, I think, along with Virgo energy.
Mhm.
Another thing with, we mentioned, or the association between the intestines and the colon. Another thing with Virgo energy is it does tend to be health conscious in a certain way, or it does have an association with health consciousness. And one, our physical health, again, is going to be the basis for us doing anything else. If we're physically unwell, it's going to be very difficult to be of service to ourselves or anyone else, really. So it's an important detail,
Mhm.
to manage in our lives, right? And I think a lot of us that are able-bodied, that are healthy, can kind of take that for granted, take that eye to the real implications of what it means to, take care of a physical body and have a physical body. So one of the things that is commonly associated with Virgo energy is issues with intestines, maybe digestive issues, tummy aches, spending time on the toilet. That is like kind of an unfortunate Virgo stereotype. But there is a connection between our bowels and our mental health. And that's been established like scientifically, the gut microbiome and
Isn't
all
that
of
wild?
Mhm.
it is. It's incredible.
The body's amazing.
It
Mhm.
is. And so all of these little flora, and I'm not a scientist, so this may be
Right. Disclaimer, medical disclaimer.
disclaimer, medical disclaimer. I'm just saying what makes sense to me. But the relationship between our intestines and our mental capacities, even, are just like our overall well being. There is a connection between those things. And so I think it's just funny that it's a Mercury ruled, it's a very mental
Mhm.
sign, and the relationship between the digestive system and our brain.
I do think that like there is a connection between like our physical health and our mental health, and I think that's like a good connection. Like when you're
Hmm.
feeling physically unwell, you might notice that you're like feeling a little more down, and like vice versa. And so it's just interesting. And I think that Virgo is able to make that connection. Most of the Virgos I know, they're very much like tuned into their body. And I've had to learn from them how to do that myself. And yeah, just, something about the physical body and our mental.
Absolutely. Because if we are neglecting those parts of ourselves, like usually we just feel like shit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you've ever gone on vacation and you come home and you're like, I need a salad right
Yes.
away because I've been doing, vacation eating. It's like, yeah, my body is telling me that I'm lacking some nutrients because I was, in vacation mode or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like there's a strong relationship between those details, those little details that we can kind of take for granted about being a person, that yeah, actually tending to our physical body is going to make a huge
Yeah.
difference
Look
in,
at hydration alone.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, every
Water.
part of our
People
lives.
get dehydrated. You're in the hospital really quick,
Mm-hmm.
and that can escalate very quickly, you know? And you got to water the garden, man.
Yeah,
That's all I'm saying.
It's like something that you have to do every day as well, like tending to our bodies, and just those things add up over time. And I think that's kind of like
Yeah.
that micro, small incremental self-improvement. That's how I kind of think of Virgo. And then across the
mm,
polarity, that's the macro, that would be Pisces. But yeah, it's just like that small every day. And I feel like Virgo is very much connected to like our daily habits and routines, and that's kind of how I make that connection. But yeah.
absolutely. Well, let's talk about Pisces energy while we're here. So it is Pisces season. I've been thinking very much about Pisces
Hmm.
because we're really in it right now. We've got the sun, Mercury,
Saturn.
Neptune.
all of the shit in Pisces right now. And goddamn, I just really feel like I feel the Pisces like
I'm
screaming,
tired. That's my issue.
right? Yeah. So let's go through some of the basics of Pisces energy. Pisces is a water sign, of course. It's also a mutable sign, as is Virgo. So there's some versatility there. There's some malleability there. It's also the 12th sign in the zodiac, which is the last sign in the zodiac, typically associated with the 12th house in astrology. So it is ruled by Jupiter in traditional astrology. And then Neptune was discovered in 1846. And so Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces. So it's one of those signs that has both a traditional ruler and a modern ruler because, way back before telescopes were a thing, we could only see out to Saturn and Jupiter. And that was the end of the solar system as far as we knew. So symbolically, the fish, usually the sign of Pisces is two
Fish.
fish, two fishes.
Fish. Fishies.
And in terms of the body, Pisces is associated with the feet, which I love reminding people of. And
Yes.
they get really
Me
upset
too.
about it
Me too.
because I guess that feet are too freaky to mention, even though they're part of our
Yeah.
body.
Weirds a lot of people out when you
Doesn't
throw that
it? I know.
tidbit out,
That's why
like, oh, by the way, Pisces rules
yeah.
the feet. And they're like, what?
Like, no, it doesn't.
No.
No.
Oh, but it
No, I've
does.
never thought about feet a day in my life. I never think
They're
about
not.
feet.
They're two fish stuck at the bottom of your legs. That's why they're ruled by Pisces.
Exactly. You won't get this on the astrology
No,
podcast,
see,
folks.
unhinged.
They're gatekeeping from you.
Yep. There's so much more to know.
So, Pisces energy, I'll just start by saying, it's weird energy. And the reason for that is that it is the last sign in the zodiac. And, we won't be able to get into the whole, shebang today, but it's kind of everything. It's everything and nothing all in one. So there is a lot of like contradiction in Pisces energy that I think is part of why it can be sort of difficult to wrap your head around because I don't know that we're supposed to be able to fully wrap our head around it, which is kind of a weird thing to say.
Mhm.
Yeah, I get that. It's kind of like the all that is. Like, how could you possibly grasp that in a, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think of when you think of Pisces energy? What comes to mind first?
The color blue immediately comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think of like boundless imagination and like the muses and like poetry and like art, like it comes from somewhere else. Like somehow we bring it down into this reality.
Mm,
That's kind of how I picture Pisces. It's just like this dreamy, flowing energy, and it is hard to like even put it into words. And I think that's why like Pisces season can be so dreamy. Like I literally felt like I'm like swimming. Like I'm just like vibing through life right now. And
Yeah.
I think we're all kind of feeling that. But yeah, it's just this hard to explain energy, otherworldly almost.
Yeah. It feels very expansive.
Yes.
Mm.
Jupiter.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's that Jupiter energy in there. And I think that, if you're newer to astrology, it might feel like, okay, how do Jupiter and Neptune kind of work together to represent Pisces energy in its totality? And Jupiter can be that very magnifying energy. It's larger than life, it's kind of more than we can wrap our heads around. Also has to do with belief and how we believe. And Neptune is very ethereal energy. I
Mm.
think it is like fog or a mist. I think that it is confusing. It can be confusing to kind of be in that Neptunian energy because think about being in fog. You can't see too far ahead of you, and you might not even be sure what it is you're exactly looking at. So those two planetary energies coming together is overwhelming, I think, in a certain way. It's powerful in a certain way. And I think that a lot of times, like if we're talking about some stereotypes of Pisces energy, love talking about those stereotypes because they just pop up so much. But it can be confusing, it can be ethereal, it can kind of not make sense even.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which way is up?
Yeah.
Pisces energy is also the ocean.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really great representation of like that Jupiter and Neptune energy coming together because the ocean is such a massive part of our
It
planet is
is.
just water,
Yep.
just
Yeah.
water. And I think that there can be a stereotype of Pisces energy being very passive
Uh-huh.
in a certain way
Mm.
and like slippery, right? Those fish, if you've ever gone fishing, you don't really want to make a whole bunch of, splashes and noises, right? Because those fish are going to bolt.
Mhm.
And so, Pisces energy, I think sometimes can have that sort of association with, one wrong move and they might swim in a different direction
Mhm.
for self-preservation or
They
just
scatter quickly.
I think that the dreaminess is a quality that is kind of a stereotype. Sometimes that can be like kind of like I'm so sorry, this is a millennial reference, but it's one of the best that I can think of, like a Luna Lovegood
Oh, yeah.
type of character, like somebody that is out there.
Just like always, like when you look at them, you can tell they're not fully present. They're having their own little daydreams.
Well, they're there and they're somewhere else, which is the kind of the duality, right, of that Pisces
Mhm.
energy is
Yeah.
like, how can you be here
Literally.
and not here at the same time? You know what I mean? Yeah, it doesn't seem like those things could go together, but then you meet somebody with like that Piscean quality and you're like, what's up with you? What are you seeing? That's something that my dog is a Pisces, and I joke often that like, I mean, she gets this stare where she's staring into like other dimensions. Like that is kind of the quality that I often notice with Pisces energy. I'm like, I know that you're just seeing and feeling things that
Yes.
I don't even know what it is. And that could be kind of a stereotype. There's just kind of a unusual quality to that Pisces energy. What are other stereotypes that you guys think of?
I mean, on the negative end, I almost think like dissociative.
Yeah. Not quite grounded in reality.
Yeah. And like have poor boundaries just because they're wanting to like blend and merge with whoever they're in front of. And so sometimes they're kind of used to that feeling themselves. And so, like, if they're like with a Virgo, like, the Virgos have like those good boundaries. And so they're not going to like even realize that they're accidentally crossing boundaries sometimes. That's kind of on the, less positive end of things. But I don't know that they're doing it consciously. It's just this kind of natural energy that they have. And so you might have to be like, put the boundaries in place with a Pisces.
Yeah. It's hard to contain the ocean.
Yes.
It's something that is sort of boundaryless in a certain way. And that is a big, I think, theme with Pisces energy is that it is really unbound in a certain way. It can be very everywhere and everything all at once in a certain way. So, if you put somebody that is kind of more of the more challenged expression of Pisces energy that doesn't maybe have like a great sense of self around, other people that do, they might take on some of those qualities while they're kind of mixing in that energy because
Mm-hmm.
they're sensitive to the energy of other people
Mm-hmm.
and other things. So it's easy to kind of take on those qualities and kind of become a part of the energy that they're sort of swimming in a certain
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah.
And that can be a negative thing and it can be a positive thing. We're kind of just speaking about these things generally. So if you're listening and you're like, I'm a Virgo and I'm a Pisces and I don't like this doesn't mean we're talking about you. We're really talking about the energy more generally, but you
Mm-hmm.
might, if you have, we all have all 12 signs in our chart. That is the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
We all have this stuff.
Yes.
So even if you don't have like a personal placement that is either Virgo or Pisces, you might be getting information about either of these energies and just chew on it. Just chew on it. Doesn't mean it's about you.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I think of is like spirituality and like intuition, and
Mm.
yeah, that's like part of that being connected to like something beyond us and picking up from the ethers. Yeah, it's a very intuitive sign and psychic in many ways.
Yeah, there's connection because, if you really start getting into things, you start noticing that all things have connection to all
Yeah.
things. And it becomes very like, well, where does one start and the other end? So it can be kind of mind bending in that way. There's a lot to
Mhm.
consider. And there's really no end to it, which can be, overwhelming, especially for those of us who are very, dreamy or prone to kind of floating in the ethers. You can kind of get lost in it, right? Because there's just so much to consider, to feel into. And, I think spirituality in general is like, it's a never ending
Mhm.
process. It's something that when we engage our spirituality, I don't know that there is like an end point to it. You know what I mean? And it's funny because like as a recently spiritual person, now podcaster, climbed right up there. I started thinking about like when did it even start? Because I could say like technically I became an astrologer a few years ago, but then I'm looking back and like, oh, all of this connection to something bigger than myself. It actually started a lot before then, and I didn't necessarily label it as spirituality. But then I'm seeing, oh, it actually is very connected to, this non-spiritual person that I was
Mhm.
before. And so the ending points and the
Yeah.
beginning points can be a lot murkier. I think murky is like a good word for Pisces, just that kind of, again, you don't always know exactly what's what, but something's there.
Yeah. How well can you see at the bottom of the ocean,
Absolutely. And there's, again, like a stereotype with Pisces energy is that it's like maybe weak or soft in a certain sense because of that. And
Yeah.
I have found that to be really not the case. I guess it depends on your perspective of those things. But when somebody with Pisces energy gets upset, they can come at you really hard about it. And it can
Mhm.
almost come out of nowhere, almost like a rogue wave. If you've ever been on a beach and been hit by a rogue wave, I
Yeah.
have. It was terrifying. I was like, what the fuck was that? It was like the
Yes.
ocean just like reached out and punched me, just specific.
Bitch slap.
It's like, whoa, where did that come from? So just because you don't see it coming doesn't mean that they're not capable of it. Maybe it has to do with your estimation of what that could look like, but
Mhm.
it's not weak energy.
And I always think of like Lori's analogy where it's like a tsunami, where it's like they pull back a little bit, pull back, and keep pulling back. And then all of a sudden it's like this huge tsunami and it just like they will take you out.
Yeah, and that is Lori Rivers, who is a producer of this podcast and also our astrology mentor. So she has educated us on a lot of this
Mhm.
stuff. We always love a shout out to
The
the
queen.
queen.
Yes.
So, compassion, empathy, imagination, intuition, those are all things that I associate with Pisces energy. I will say Pisces energy also can be very of service as well. And it can be pretty immersive, I would say, in certain ways. Like, it can be like, okay, there's a problem that this person that I care about has. Therefore, the problem is
Mhm.
now my problem. And it could
Yes.
almost feel like you are one and the same. And the reality of the situation is that, yes, it's a good to care about, the people that we care about, and we are connected to the people that we care about because, like I said, Pisces is about the connection between all
Mhm.
things. So, yeah, it's like if somebody else is hurting, well, then I'm hurting. Like that on some level is true, right? It's like pain in the world is my pain, right? Because we are all connected. But on the other side of that, we are also separate entities. So it's like, well, you actually are not capable of, feeling everything that somebody else is feeling, even if you are an empath,
Yeah.
even if you are, very connected to that person, you can't feel somebody's feelings
Mhm.
for them. It's actually not even the most helpful way
No,
to,
it's not.
yeah. So, but, on the other side of that, it can also be a very deep sense of compassion. It can be, I understand, I can sympathize, I can feel the feelings, and I can feel that they remind me of things that
Mhm.
I've been through. And so there is a connection between the two of us, but there can be, on the higher end, like an understanding that, yes, this is your issue and I am feeling compassion for you. Therefore, I'm going to do things that are in my power to be of assistance to you, to be of service to you. So, it can be compassionate on different levels and sometimes with more boundaries than other times. So I would say both Virgo and Pisces do have this quality of compassion, of care as well. So they're just kind of different flavors of
Mhm.
doing it. But at the same time, like there can be a lot of similarity to it. Like, if a Pisces has like worked on having boundaries and understanding where the line is between themselves and others and what like a healthy support, what a healthy way to be of service can be, then I feel like it can take on kind of a more of a Virgo quality in
Mhm.
that sense.
I definitely think that like each of the sister signs can learn something from, their opposite sign, and it can help make those qualities less rigid almost. Like with Virgo, like they can have such like rigid boundaries, and so they can almost like learn from Pisces and learn to just help, like, because I think Pisces is good at like letting things flow, whereas like Virgo's like, no, it has to be like structure like this. And so it's kind of like they can learn from each other and balance that out. And that goes for all kinds of different things.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a great
Yeah.
point. You're so right. All of the sister signs. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, let's talk more about them as sister signs, as a polarity, right? To quote unquote opposites. And again, when we say opposite, all right, my conversation with Mackenzie and Kathy continues over on Patreon for sponsors of this podcast. We talked about how Virgo and Pisces energy go together and how they really interact as sister signs. Sponsors of the podcast also get access to the Petty Astrology Advice Hotline, custom tarot spreads from me, and a lot more bonus content. If you'd like to become a part of the Petty Astrology community, you can head over to Patreon at the link in the show notes. All right, so the week ahead's astrology looks pretty exciting to me. On Saturday, March 9th, we've got Mercury moving into Aries, so that should put some giddy up in all of our steps. It's been a slower, languishing Pisces season. We've got a lot of planets in Pisces, like I've continued to mention. And of course, we still have Venus and Mars in Aquarius, but we've got the new moon happening on Sunday, March 10th, and following that on Monday, March 11th, Venus will be moving into Pisces. So try to enjoy the hell out of that Aquarius energy while we still got it going. It's very innovative, very progressive energy, and I think we really need to make use of it while we have it right in front of us. But let's talk about this new moon in Pisces, because I myself am very excited for what this will bring. So the new moon in Pisces is happening March 10th at 20 degrees Pisces. And if you're on the West Coast, it'll happen at about 1 a.m. Pacific time. Every new moon is a great time to set intentions. And what the hell does that even mean? The thing is when we use our energy, it really helps if we're deliberate with it. If we're not just kind of spilling it out all over the place and just hoping for the best, right? If we look at life as a creative project and understand that Pisces energy is incredibly creative, imaginative energy. So what is it that you want to create? What do you want to create in your personal life? And what do you want to create on a collective level? This new moon is really magical for me personally because I've been talking almost nonstop on this podcast about the need to imagine a better future, the need to take deliberate action to make that imagined future a reality, and the immense power that we have in imagining a future that we are often told is impossible, that it's too good to be true, that it's out of reach, that human beings are just not capable of making things better than they are. We just have to sit and accept the way that things are and not make too much fuss, not cause any problems. You can see how that benefits our oppressors, right? It should be clear as day that holding back our imagination, holding back our compassion benefits, well, not us. Not us regular folks. Not us who still give a shit about other people. This Pisces new moon can really be so magical. It's really a time to lean into those ideas. Be deliberate and specific about what it is you want to create for yourself and what it is you want to create collectively. And that's what I mean by setting intentions. You're being intentional and really maybe literally spelling it out. You can do some kind of creative art project, you can do a voice note, you can do whatever you feel intuitively drawn to do. And with this Pisces energy, following your intuition is going to be really important. As we've talked about a lot in this episode, Pisces energy is very naturally in tune. It is very naturally connected. And I personally believe that each and every one of us is connected to something greater than ourselves. We have the opportunity to lean into our sense of inspiration, our sense of forward movement. So this new moon is really about planting some very magical seeds for yourself. Instead of looking around at everything that is wrong in the world and assuming that it will be that way forever. One thing that astrology has really brought sharply into focus for me is that nothing is ever the same twice. I think that is a really liberating idea. And I think that that plays really well into the themes of this new moon. Because when you plant seeds for a future that has never been seen before in our shared reality, it might feel like an impossible mission. You don't know how those seeds are going to develop. Maybe you don't even know how to care for them or water them properly. That doesn't mean that we don't plant the seeds, though. That doesn't mean that we don't honor the things that we want to create and manifest into this reality. Each and every human being is so powerful in the sense that we have the ability to imagine things that do not already exist. And as far as I know, not a lot of animals have that ability. We were given this gift for a reason. And even if you don't consider yourself a creative person, if you're not an artist or a painter, I really want to remind you that every decision that we make can be a creative decision if we approach it that way. So instead of letting things pass you by or, just deciding that you're going to go with whatever flows your way, this is a moment to be very intentional. Like I've been saying, if we want to foster the growth of these seeds, we are going to have to do things a bit differently. Because if we do the same things that we've always done, well, I would say that that's probably going to produce very similar results that we've already seen. And I don't know about you, but I'm really ready for something different. The way that the world is right now isn't working for me. And in fact, I don't think it's working for a lot of us. So the important thing is to understand that more is possible for yourself and for the collective. And this is a moment to really take the reins. Don't set intentions based on someone else's idea of what's possible. This is not about limiting yourself to the things that have already happened and what we can expect from that, or confining yourself to somebody else's idea of what the future should be like. Because we are a planet with so many different kinds of people and different beliefs, different ideologies, different ideas and practices. And I personally don't see any reason why things can't be more accommodating of that. Things can't be better than they are. Because Pisces energy encompasses so many things that seem like they don't even belong together. It is the all that is. And instead of letting that be a barrier to why the world can't be better, what if all of those differences and accounting for them and shaping a world where maybe they can all have a place, maybe they can all respect one another's differences, maybe that could make things more beautiful for everyone. Maybe the idea that we all need to be fighting all the time, that there's no way that all these different groups of people could ever coexist and get along, maybe that's the fantasy, that there's just no way that we could cooperate, that we could work together, that we could find solutions, that we can create new pathways for ourselves and others. Do not feed the illusion that just because things are a certain way now, that means they'll always be that way. So look for the magic this new moon, and more than that, look to create the magic in your life and in the world at large. And I want you to be very specific about how you want to do that. And that's the way that you can take advantage of this new moon energy. I know that there is a lot going on in the world right now. It can feel very isolating, it can feel very lonely. And especially for those of us who care, it can be very difficult to find people to connect with on this level and talk about things like this. Our spiritual desires, our goals, our dreams. Those things can be very personal. But every new moon is about planting seeds. And one of the reasons that I created my new moon manifesting circle is I wanted to create a space for people to honor their desires. A safe space where people could actually acknowledge the things that they're working towards in the world. New moons happen every month, so the New Moon Manifesting Circle meets on a monthly basis. Our next meeting is going to be on the new moon this week, Sunday, March 10th at 4 p.m. Pacific. If you are looking for more spiritual community, if you're looking to learn a little bit more about astrology, and no, you do not have to know anything about astrology to participate in the circle, I'm there to guide you the whole time. But I go through the specific energy of each new moon. I have questions to prompt thought and to help you shape those intentions specifically for the energy of each new moon. I walk you through the whole thing. We share our intentions. We update each other on our progress from previous meetings. And we just have a really nice time together. So if you're interested in joining us for this month's Manifesting Circle, check out the link to Patreon in the show notes. I hope you enjoy the energy of this very magical new moon, and I will see you next week. This episode was produced by Lori Rivers and brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon.